Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. I have a guest person here and his name is Wei. And I met Wei by helping him out with the rear axle seal job, and then he returned the favor and helped me out with my transmission filter replacement. And now he's back on another day, and what we're going to do is we're going to replace the fuel sending unit in the gas tank because he's got an issue with his gas gauge. When he fills up to full, it's only showing at 3/4, so it's not showing all the way full. So what Wei did, like a smart guy like he is, he went to a pick and pull and he pulled the fuel sending unit off of a donor vehicle. His vehicle is a 97 SR5 four-wheel drive 4Runner, and he pulled it off of a 2000 SR5. So now he's at the Timmy the Toolman Studios, and we're going to walk you through how you would drop the fuel tank and pull out that sending unit, replace it with the new one. And this would be the same procedure if you, say, had a failed fuel pump. It's the same procedure to drop the fuel tank because the fuel pump is attached to the same bracket assembly that the fuel sending unit is. So this would be all the same steps if you were going to be replacing a fuel pump. Or you had to drop the tank for whatever reason. You got some type of leak or whatever the situation is. We're going to show you how to get that tank out. We're going to use the factory service manual like always, but the factory service manual isn't as helpful like it usually is. I went to the area where it talks about replacing the fuel pump. All it says is refer to this page to remove the tank. And then it's just a schematic of all the different parts that make up the tank and all the hoses and everything. It doesn't really give you a step-by-step, play-by-play of what you need to do. So we're just going to have to use our mechanical aptitude and logic of all the things we have to remove. The electrical connection to the fuel pump, any of the hoses that connect to the fuel tank, before we actually release the straps and drop the tank down in a controlled manner. The best way to set yourself up for this is don't have the fuel tank totally full, because then it's going to be super heavy. So I would recommend have it like no more than 1/4 of a tank, and then use some type of jack. If you have it, you either use a regular hydraulic jack, disperse the weight with a big long board to support the tank on its way down and on its way up, or what we're going to use is a transmission jack that has a nice wider base to support that tank, taking it in and out. We currently have the 4Runner jacked up in the front and the back to give us room to work and room to film. If you feel like you can do the job without jacking up the vehicle, that's what you do. We're just got it way up off the ground, so we have plenty of room to work and to film this job. So one thing you want to be aware of, just like I mentioned in the fuel filter replacement video, you want to choose a smart location for this job. If you have a water heater in your garage where you're working and it has an exposed pilot light, might not be the best place to do this job, because we're going to be spilling fuel, and if that fuel vapor finds an ignition source, you could have a fire or an explosion. So wherever you're working, you want to have it well ventilated, and you don't want to have any ignition sources. Just pay attention to that and don't ruin your day by exploding your garage or your shop, okay? So that's all I want to do. That's the Timmy the Toolman safety message. This is the fuel sending unit that attaches to the fuel bracket assembly that goes into the tank. And so this is your little float. So as you fill up the tank, it's going to go up like this to let you know that the tank is full, and then as your level drops, it changes the electrical signal to the computer, which tells the fuel gauge where your fuel's at. This is the thing he's actually replacing that he got from the donor vehicle. Before we get started, another thing we wanted to show you is how you can test the fuel gauge sending unit to see if it's actually working properly. So Wei did a little bit of research online of how to test the fuel gauge sending unit. You do it by checking the ohms resistance at different levels. What we have here is we have our multimeter. I have the red test lead hooked up to the volts ohm section on the right side of my multimeter, and then I have the black lead connect to the comm jack. I'm pretty new to doing electrical stuff, so cut me some slack if I'm saying the wrong terms, but I'm just taking this information right out of my little manual for the multimeter, and this is the way it says to set it up to do an ohms test. And then on my gauge right here, you set it to the level you think you're going to be reading. Way already let me know that this is going to be an ohms reading anywhere from 110 to 4. So I set it up to read up to 200 ohms. This whole bank right here, you see that symbol there, that's the ohm symbol. This is the way you set it up to do an ohms reading on this actual multimeter. Yours is probably going to look different, whichever style multimeter you have. So we have the test leads into the electrical connection for the fuel sending unit. One wire is black here, the other one in the middle is red. And so he just set it up with the black lead going to the black wire and the red lead going to the red wire. Pretty easy. He's going to manipulate this float, and we're going to look at the different readings when he has it at empty, which would be down here, and when he'd have it at full up here. Right now the float is in the down position, meaning that the tank is empty. Now he's going to raise it to the full position, and it's reading about 3.2, and this is pretty close to what Wei learned about it. At empty it's supposed to show about 110, and at full it's going to be near 4 ohms. It appears that this fuel sending unit is going to work for him, and when we pull out the old one, we're going to do the same test, and we're going to see if there's a difference in the ohms readings we get with the old one compared to this donor one. This surface right here, where the gauge moves along that surface and takes its reading, it could get kind of dirty and not give an accurate reading. He just took some isopropyl alcohol and cleaned off this contact surface. Hopefully it's going to give him accurate readings when he gets it in the tank. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the electrical connection to the fuel pump. The electrical connection is actually underneath the driver's side passenger rear seat. Wei's going to lift up the cushion, and then we need to peel back that carpet right underneath the seat because the access hatch is close to where his hand is currently. We're going to remove this plastic trim piece on the edge of the door here so he can pull the carpet up easier. So it's just a couple Phillips head screws. And he's just using a drill. And these pop up, they have the actual little snaps right at the screw hole. So pry up where the screw hole is and you can get it out. In order to get the carpet more out of the way, Wei's lifting up the passenger side rear seat. There we go, he's got it. Now with that other seat out of the way, he can get more movement out of the carpet. So now he's got that peeled back. So there's 3 Phillips head screws, 1, 2, and 3. And now he should be able to pry that plastic hatch up. It just lift up. Wei is going to disconnect this electrical connection utilizing a flathead screwdriver. So he's going to depress the tab that faces forward towards the front of the vehicle, and then use his hand to grab the plug and pull up. And that's all there is to it. So now the electrical connection to the fuel pump is disconnected. There's one more connector, and it's facing the outside of the vehicle. It's right near the edge of the door. Give you a reference. Here's the hole that we just pulled the electrical connection to the fuel pump, and then you travel towards the door, and it's right underneath this white plastic piece, and he's just going to use a screwdriver to get underneath the clip and undo it. Wei just stuffed the electrical connector into this hole so nothing's going to maybe hook on something when we start dropping the tank. So he just took that electrical connector that we took out right there, and he stuffed it down into this hole that goes underneath the vehicle. Now both electrical connections that will end up getting damaged if you don't disconnect them are disconnected, and now we're going to get underneath the vehicle and start disconnecting other things. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start the vehicle and reduce the fuel pressure in the lines, because we are going to be disconnecting one of the high pressure lines that comes from the tank and goes towards the fuel filter. So we show this procedure in our fuel filter replacement video, and if you're interested in that video, you can click on the link above. Wei is just going to start it up and it's barely going to get started. It's just going to sputter and then die, and that basically reduces the fuel pressure. So when we break the line free, fuel isn't going to go spewing out all over the place. So go ahead, Wei, and try to start it. And that's it. We experienced the same thing when we did it on the fuel filter replacement video. It kind of tries to start, but it doesn't really start. But what that did is reduce the fuel pressure in the line. Now we're going to get underneath the vehicle and disconnect the fuel lines and any other lines that's going to hold up getting the tank out. Right now we're on the driver's side frame rail. You're seeing some lines that we're going to disconnect. The first one we're going to disconnect is this metal line. On the left side, it's a 19mm flare nut. On the right side, it's a 14mm. So Wei's going to get on those two fittings and break free the 14mm side, because the 19mm side looks like it's solid. It's not meant to spin. The 14mm is meant to spin off.
Yeah.
Got it? Oh. We got a catch container underneath there. So he finally got the 14mm flare nut loose, and we're dripping fuel on us a little bit. And we're just going to let this drain a little bit before we take it off all the way. There seemed to be still a lot of pressure on the line, so Wei removed the gas filler cap, and that seemed to work, unless it's just a coincidence. And now it's not dripping anymore, and he's going to unscrew the line all the way. So the line is still a little bit stiff into the fitting. He has to still use the wrenches to loosen it. Wei has noticed that this thing is kind of tight the whole way out, which is interesting. So now he's finally got it loose. A little more fuel's coming out now. All right, that line's disconnected. Wei is going to now go for one of the smaller rubber lines. He's going to compress that clamp and just get it down further on the hose. And now he's going to try to break that free. Now, just like any type of rubber hose, vacuum hose, radiator hose, it's going to sometimes kind of get really stuck on there. So he's twisting the hose to break it free. Is it coming off?
Slowly.
So he was able, just with hand strength, to break the rubber line free from the metal line. If you find that the connection's too hard to get free just with your hand strength, you could use a little pick tool like so to help break the rubber connection free from the metal line. So this is like a little Harbor Freight special, tiny little pick tool. The third and final one is he's going to compress that clamp also, slide it down, and then break that hose free. These clamps are not really strong clamps. He's able to compress it just with his hand. It's not a super strong clamp. We noticed that this line keeps on dripping fuel on us, so I have this kit of silicone plugs, so I just plug this sucker up so it stops dripping fuel onto the ground and onto us. This third line is giving Wei a little bit of trouble, so he is using the little Harbor Freight pick tool to get in between the rubber and the metal to help break the bond free. If you have a stubborn hose, you'll want to support the metal line while you're twisting the rubber line, because you can easily bend these fuel lines if you start cranking on them. So support it with your opposite hand.
So the lines are pretty easy to remember. This one will only fit for this metal line. This middle one goes to this middle one here, and so the one that's remaining, the outside one, will be for the outside one, and that's how you can remember which one goes where.
Now we're going to remove some of the bolts that hold the skid plate for the fuel tank. There's two 12mm bolts. We're actually at the rear cross member right here, and Wei's pointing at it. It's the outside ones. That one right there, and then the other one on the other side right there. The center one is actually for the tank itself. So Wei's going to use a small DeWalt impact gun with a long extension and a 12mm socket, and he's going to zip these suckers out. Okay, there's one. And he's got the other one out. The next fastener for the skid plate that Wei's going to loosen is on the driver's side frame rail right underneath the rear door. One thing to note is that we are currently supporting the skid plate with a transmission jack. If you watched our transmission replacement video where we replaced the transmission on Sean's rig, this is the same jack that we use. This is a Harbor Freight special and works really nice. The next fastener that Way's gonna release is right in front of the driver's side rear shock absorber. The last one for the skid plate is towards the center of the vehicle, near the rear end, in between the gas tank and the drive shaft. We should be able to now lower the transmission jack, and the skid plate is gonna come with it. There it comes. This transmission jack is pretty nice. It has pretty good control. Is it hooking over there, or is it coming loose?
It is.
Looks like it's hanging up a little bit.
Something.
Okay. The skid plate was just hooking on the rear sway bar, so Wade just has to clear it of that. Now it's going to drop down. There we go. And we can just pull that sucker out. There we go. Skid plate is out of the way. The next thing that we're going to disconnect is the fuel filler hose. You can do this with a Phillips screwdriver, or you can do it with a 10 millimeter. So Way has a long extension with a 10 millimeter socket and the Milwaukee M12 tool, and he's going to ratchet that sucker loose. All right, the clamp was loose. Just like many rubber hose connections to metal, the rubber filler hose gets kind of stuck on the metal fill pipe. So we use a tool to get in between the rubber and the metal, and it's like a big long pick tool. This is a set I bought online, and I'll put a link to this set. So he's working it around the whole circumference to break that hose connection free. And then once he's got it pretty loose, he should now be able to pull that off with his hands. There it is. He's sliding it back. It is a pretty stiff hose. If Way is eating his Wheaties, maybe he can do it. Good job. All right. So now the rubber filler pipe hose is disconnected from the metal hose. There's a second smaller tube that's connected to the fill pipe. Way is going to use a bent nose, needle nose pliers, compress the clamp, and you could just slide it out of your way. Now Way's going to get in there with the pick tool and break the connection free. With this short rubber hose, we're finding that we can't really pull it back far enough because there's not enough flexibility in the hose because it's so short. So we're going to actually go to the next step, which is loosen the strap that holds the tank on and drop the tank down just a little bit to where we can have a little more room to pull that hose off the fitting. We just had to use a little more force and pull that sucker back just with some hand strength, and it worked. You can actually pull that hose off without having to really lower the tank. So now Way is gonna release the 14 millimeter bolt that holds the tank strap to the driver's side frame. For this rear strap, you could just pull a simple pin and get this strap out of the way, but Way says it's really not necessary. This strap is flexible, so it's up to you whether you remove the strap all the way or just let it hang while you get the tank out and back in. The last fastener that's holding the tank in is another 12 millimeter bolt, and this one is near the two bolts that were holding the skid onto the frame near the cross member. He's just going to zip this one out now. Way is operating the transmission jack. He's going to start releasing pressure slowly, and I'm going to be paying attention to see if anything is snagging that we missed. So these three lines were hitting right here and holding up the tank from coming down. So push these up and put them on the inside of this bracket right here. So now he should be able to drop the tank. Okay, go ahead, Way. Let's see if this thing's going to come down now. Something's hanging it up again. We noticed that this bracket was holding us up. It wasn't just the hose that we had to disconnect, but this bracket is held to the frame, and so it started to bend on us. So it's a 12 millimeter nut on the top here. And so I'm just using a flex head box end wrench to loosen this 12 millimeter nut so this bracket will come free. Okay, so here's the little 12 millimeter offender holding us up. Way is going to start lowering the tank, and I'm going to see if I can manipulate the rest of the hose so it doesn't get caught up and start bending things. Go ahead, Way. Hold on. Okay, keep going a little more. Keep going. Stop right there. Okay, keep going.
Alright, that's it.
We did run into one snag, and it was something that we didn't see, is that, see this electrical connector? This is the second electrical connector we removed when we lifted the back seat. What we didn't know is that this thing is attached to the tank right here, and while we were lowering it down thinking everything that we needed to disconnect was disconnected, this wire was stretching and finally broke this plastic clip right here that the wire was attached to. So as you're lowering down the tank and you can get a better view of this clip, before you really start stretching the wires, undo this plastic clip right here so then you free this wire of the tank. Now that we think we finally have everything disconnected, we are gonna roll the tank from out underneath the rig. And we'll just keep it right here on level ground. What do you think, Wei?
Not too bad.
Yeah.
We didn't break anything that I know of.
Hopefully. Yeah, the only thing we're concerned about is that wire that we are stretching, and hopefully we didn't do any damage to it. But you can see now that, look where this clip was. It's on top of the tank. You can see why we didn't see it, and you can see how you can get this up. You'd have to compress this clip and then push it out this way. And then this was where that 12mm nut was affixing this bracket to the frame, and this was this second tube that was fighting us a little bit. See how short this tube is? And it was just a little hard to pull it back this direction to slip it off the fitting. And then here's your filler pipe hose. And then this is where the plug goes to power the fuel pump. And then again, these are the 3 lines that we disconnected on the front side of the tank. So you can see how these lines run. There's one here, one here, one here, and they route along the top of the tank and go to these 3 lines. So there's all this like fine debris and junk on top of the tank. So he's just gonna take a little brush and just brush off the tank. So when we do take these bolts out, the less chance that crap is gonna get in there. You could also do it with some compressed air if you have an air compressor. Now we're gonna remove all these fasteners that hold this fuel bracket assembly to the fuel tank. They're an 8mm socket, or they have a Phillips head too, but we're gonna use the M12 ratchet with a 8mm, and he's gonna zip them out. Before we try to lift this off, these lines are holding to the tank. So there's a clip right here that just kind of pulls up, and this is not going to hold us up. What's going to hold this up is there's a 10mm nut right here holding this bracket on there. Wei's just going to use a flex head ratcheting 10mm and zip that out. Okay, that's free. So now you could see that that's all free, since we're not doing so good with making sure everything's disconnected. It looks like this line right here is also connected to the same bracket. If we remove this out of the bracket, then we can then get these 2 lines free with this whole assembly. He's popping out there. Okay, and he's got it out of there. Now we've isolated these 2 lines from this other line. So this is kind of stuck on there. You need to slowly pry up on the edges. Use your tool of choice. We just have this tiny little pry tool that was part of a pry bar kit that I bought on Amazon, and he's just going to get underneath the lip and start prying around the whole circumference a little at a time. Looks like it's coming up. Looks like you got to rotate it this way. There we go. Here's the whole fuel bracket assembly out of the tank. If you could see here, this is why you have skids when you go four-wheeling. You can see the damage that he's done to this sucker. So I'm gonna actually try to bend this out for him by hammering on it a little bit with a big sledge and pound some of these dents out for him. All right, so now Wei is gonna disconnect the electrical connector for this fuel sending unit. And it's just a little squeezable clip right here. You squeeze in to remove it, pretty simple. And now with the fuel sending unit still attached to the fuel bracket assembly, we're gonna do the same ohms test that we did earlier. Red to red and black to black. So when the float is all the way down, it's showing similar to the replacement one he got off the donor vehicle. And it's showing close to 110 ohms. And now he's gonna bring the float up to act like it's full. And it's showing the same damn thing. It's showing 3.2. Now the question is replacing this gonna actually work? Well, there's only one way to find out. We're gonna replace it and see if it makes a difference with his fuel gauge. Now be able to show full when he has a full tank of gas in there. Now Wei is just gonna loosen the two screws that hold the fuel sending unit to the fuel bracket assembly. You either use a Phillips or you have that JIS type. This is actually a JIS. So the screwdriver he used is actually a Japanese industry standard, because on Japanese vehicles, you think they're Phillips, but they're actually just a little bit different, and a JIS screwdriver fits onto the heads of these screws a little bit nicer. And this one is made by Vessel. I got this online on Amazon. I'll put a link to it in the video description. Now he's putting the donor one back onto the fuel bracket assembly. Not too complicated, just a couple little screws. Let's make sure they're nice and snug. All right, so that step's done. And he now has to plug in the connector, and it snaps in, and he's good to go. Wei decided that he's gonna replace this filter that goes to the fuel pump. He got this actually from O'Reilly, so it's not a Toyota one, it's an aftermarket one. It looks a little bit different shape, but we're gonna hope that this thing connects up. What we did learn from the factory service manual is there's a little clip that holds this sucker on to the fuel pump, and it says it's a non-reusable clip, and unfortunately this little filter that he bought doesn't come with the replaceable clip, so we're gonna have to reuse it. So to get this sucker out, he's gonna pull back on this, and it's gonna get this rubber grommet out of the way. This is the little clip that the manual was talking about, that you don't reuse it. So he's gonna try to get a little screwdriver in there and pry it off. Just don't bend it out of whack too bad. Get underneath it. This is a little clip that the factory service manual says is not reusable, but we didn't really bend it up too much, so hopefully it's going to work to securely attach that filter to the fuel pump. Now that that clip is free, he should be able to pull that filter right off. And there we go. Now we'll just match it up. The important thing is the size of this opening right here and here, and it looks like it's exactly the same. It's just the shape of the filter is a little different. This has more kind of like a trapezoid, and this is more like a rectangle. But when you look at the side here, it's got this little metal band, and this one also has a little metal band. So it looks like it is the correct part for the job. So he's just gonna slide that new one on. And now he's gonna have to reuse the clip. Maybe, you know what, bend those tabs in a little bit. There you go, we're on the same wavelength. It's got like a blades to the clip, and he's just gonna bend them in a little bit to where they will grab the post of the fuel pump a little better. Now that he's bent the tabs in a little bit, it'll give a little more resistance on the post when he slides it on. So he's got one finger holding the tab on, and he's using a little mini screwdriver to push it down onto the post. So it took a little bit of patience to get this clip back in, because he bent the tabs in to where this clip would go tightly onto the post. Now we got to get the rubber grommet back on, and then he's going to slide that assembly over the top to capture the whole thing. When you think about it, in addition to the clip holding this on, you also have this whole assembly with the rubber grommet holding it on also. So see this gasket? If you're gonna do this job, it's probably better to go in advance and get this gasket ordered, because we called a local Toyota dealer, they had to order it. We called some different auto parts stores, they didn't have it either. And Way didn't come with this gasket. And this is one of the first questions I asked him: did you get the gasket to reseal this fuel pump bracket assembly to the fuel tank? And he didn't have it. So we're just going to have to assemble this with the old gasket, which isn't ideal, but hopefully he's not going to have a leak. But best practices, if you're going to bother dropping this tank, this is the opportune time to put a new rubber gasket onto this fuel pump assembly. Not every day you get a view into a gas tank. This actually has some type of orange bucket looking thing, and what that is for, I really don't know. And it doesn't move. I reach my hand in there, the little bucket doesn't move. That bucket is most likely so the float of the fuel gauge sending unit doesn't go flopping around as you're driving down the road and the fuel is sloshing around. So that's probably what that's for. Now, looking at this gasket, the seal is met on the inside of this gasket, not on the outside. We're seeing a little deterioration of the rubber gasket on the outside, but the inside looks intact. There's no cracks, there's no tears. So hopefully Way is going to get away with this and not find he has a leak on his tank because he screwed up and didn't get a new gasket. We messed with this a little bit. Now we got the right orientation, how it goes in. So you have the tank in this fashion, just like so. He's going in with the float first, then the filter, and then once he gets it down enough to where he can start to rotate the whole assembly, then it could drop in. And then now the lines are in the right place and everything's in the right place. Way is now getting the small 8mm bolts attached to the tank now. Way is going to use that JIS screwdriver and just get them all started, but not necessarily tight yet. Now he's just going to make sure that they're all touched down, but not too tight with his hand. It's a very light torque spec for these fasteners. It's 31 inch-pounds. He's got them all now touching down, and now he's going to transition to the torque wrench set at 31 inch-pounds, and he's going to slowly bring them up in a crossing pattern. So give a little turn there, go across, give a little turn, then go across again. He's just going to go back and forth and slowly bring it up to the spec. Okay, and he's going to just go around one more time now and just make sure they're all up the spec. Alright, so all these fasteners are now torqued to 31 inch-pounds. Way just snapped this pipe in, and this actually goes to the fuel evaporation vent tube. That's what this is right here. Now we have to reattach this bracket, so he's going to snap that one in, and then he's going to put that 10mm bolt in and just tighten it down. We're not going to worry about a torque spec for this one either. It's just a bracket holding the lines on. He's just going to cinch it up nice and snug. We've got it back on the transmission jack, and now we're going to roll it back underneath the vehicle. We have the fuel tank underneath the vehicle now. Way's hand is on this line that has the bracket that we had to take that one nut off the top so we can get this bracket free. So we have to get it above the frame member there. So we want to snake that above first, or at least get it started. Then we can start jacking the tank up. As Way is jacking up the tank, I'm going to make sure that I can get this tube up above this member of the frame here. I'm just manipulating things that are going to get stuck. Hold up right there, Way. Let me get this filler tube out of the way. Okay. Okay, keep going. Lift it up. Okay, stop right there. Getting this 12mm nut to attach this bracket back to the frame is a little difficult. It's better to have the tank down just a little bit. You get the 12mm nut started on the stud, and then you could tighten it up. I would suggest a flex head 12mm wrench to tighten it up. So now that that bracket's secure, now we can start getting the other fasteners that hold the tank to the frame. We noticed all the fasteners that hold the tank on are all pretty much the same except for one. So they're all these 12mm frame bolts that hold the skid end of the tank to the frame. This bigger one, this 14mm one, is for that strap that we took off the driver's side. Toyota, like usual, does everybody a favor and makes all the fasteners almost all the same. Now we're going to start getting the bolts that hold the tank to the frame connected. The middle one of these three fasteners is the one that actually holds the tank on, and then the two outside ones are for the skid. So Way's probably gonna have to jack up the tank a little bit more. There we go. I think that might be tall enough. So Way has the middle bolt started, and we're not gonna get the center bolt tightened yet. We just got it sort of snug to where if we have to make some adjustments to get the skid bolts lined up, we can. Way is now gonna reattach the gas tank strap on the driver's side. He's using that 14mm bolt. All right, so Way's got that bolt started. Way now just has a 3/8 ratchet, and he's just gonna snug this strap up. Now that the gas tank is securely fastened to the rear and the front, now we're gonna work on getting all the lines reconnected that we disconnected. We've got the filler pipe hose and the other hose connected. The one up above is just a little bit harder because you have to bend it quite a bit to get it back on the fitting, but it works. You just have to crank on it and get it back on there. And now we're working on the ones in the front. These two were simple. This one and the one behind it, it was just a simple of sliding them back onto the metal tube and moving the clamp in the right position. Now for this one, it seems kind of weird, but the factory service manual actually says for these high pressure fuel connections to put a little bit of motor oil on this flared end of the tubing because it helps the connection be leak free. So we're going to smear just a little bit of motor oil right on the end of this flared tubing. First Way is just going to clean it up the end with a rag, and then we're going to put just a tiny bit of motor oil on the end of that tubing. So Way dipped his finger into some motor oil, and he's just going to wipe it onto the end of the flared tubing right there. There we go. That's probably enough. Now he's going to join the fitting. With any high pressure gas line fitting, you got to make sure you get them tight. So hopefully the combination of the motor oil on the end of the flared tubing and getting this connection tight, when we start the engine, we're not going to have any leak. If there's going to be any leak that happens, it's going to be at that fitting. So you can see that the skid sort of protected his tank. He doesn't have a hole in his tank, but his tank is definitely dented. Way bought the truck like this, so obviously the person who owned it did do some four-wheeling in it, but the tank is not compromised, it's not leaking, so that's the main thing. So now we're going to get the skid plate back in position. We've got all the fasteners started to hold the tank and the skid plates on, and now we're going to torque these to spec. All of the 12mm bolts for the skid plate and for the tank are torqued to 22 foot-pounds. Okay, that one hit the torque spec that actually holds the tank on. Now he's going to do the two that hold the skid plate on. That one hit the torque spec. All those three bolts near the rear cross member are torqued to 22 foot-pounds. Now we're going to do the ones in the back. Way's doing the next one forward, which is the side one on the driver's side frame. Okay, that one's torqued to 22 foot-pounds. This is the one that's in front of the driver's side shock absorber. That's torqued to 22 foot-pounds. And then he's getting the one that's more towards the passenger side, like right above the third member. Okay. Way's going to tighten the last thing, and that is the strap that holds the tank up in the rear. So that one is actually torqued to 30 foot-pounds. Okay. Now that we got all the hoses connected, we got the tank securely attached below and the skid plate firmly attached, now we're back up into the cab of the vehicle, and Way's now going to reconnect the plug that gives power to the fuel pump, and then he's going to reattach the connector for the other line. Okay, those are both now attached. Now he's going to get the plastic cover that covers up this port in place. Okay, the cover's back on. Now we can get the carpet back in place. Now we just got to pop this plastic trim piece near the door in place and put the screws in. Now that we have everything back together, Way's going to start the engine. I'm underneath the vehicle looking at the lines. I'm mainly concerned about this line right here. So I'm going to be watching for a leak, and sometimes it might take a while for the leak to develop, but I'm just going to see if any drip develops on that connection. So go ahead and start it, Way. It looks good. The connection doesn't look like it's leaking, which is awesome. All right, so Way and I got everything back together. The vehicle runs, which is good. We don't see any leaks at that high pressure fitting. Another good thing. Now we've got to determine if all this work was actually worth it. And we're going to go to the gas station, fill up his tank, and see where his gauge reads. Hopefully it's now going to show all the way full. We just filled up the tank and it's still not going all the way to full. So I reckon this didn't fully fix his problem, but he did say that the gauge is actually showing a little higher than it has before. We are done with this job. Did we accomplish what we set out to do? Not really. We're kind of hoping that the fuel sending unit he got off of a donor rig at the pick and pull in Oakland was gonna fix his problem, but it didn't. His tank gauge is still not showing all the way full with a full tank of fuel. There is a technical service bulletin from Toyota regarding 99 and 2000 years, where there's a circuit board behind the dashboard instrument panel with your speedometer and all your gauges, and there's some other things you have to follow for that technical service bulletin. We just don't know if it will pertain to his year because he has a 97. It's not a 99 or 2000. So the video, I think, still has value for you because we showed you how to properly drop the fuel tank, to take out the fuel bracket assembly for whatever reason you need to. Maybe your fuel pump is bad. Maybe the fuel sending unit is completely not working at all. You have to replace that. We thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special guest Way. We'll be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Take care. Bye-bye.
Timmy.